Hey, what is going on guys? Represent Stealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the mid lane tier list for patch 8.16. So to start it off in the S tier for this patch is going to be Anivia. Now Anivia has gotten indirectly stronger over these past few patches now, with assassins coming back into the meta, with assassins being some of the most picked mid laners right now. Anivia is just a really reliable blind pick in the mid lane because you can play her into a lot of these assassin picks. She's one of the only mages that can actually do well in lane and do well throughout the game against a lot of assassin picks, and assassins also did get nerfed in this patch as well, which does mean that she's even a stronger pick against them in 8.16. Anivia also didn't really get hurt at all by any of the rune changes in this patch. A lot of the runes got nerfed in this patch, but none of the runes that Anivia takes actually got hit, so it doesn't make her any weaker here in 8.16. And overall, I just think she's a very reliable mid lane pick. She's great at shutting down assassins. She can really punish assassins if they try to roam at level 6 due to her really good shove, and her mid game is one of the strongest for any mid lane champions. So next up in the S tier here for yet another patch is going to be Aurelion Sol. So Aurelion Sol stays a strong pick in 8.16. He didn't get hurt really at all by the rune changes. Celerity did get nerfed, which does make him a little bit weaker, but other mid laners got hit definitely a lot harder than Aurelion Sol due to the rune changes, so it doesn't really affect him very much at all. He's still your best early shove and roam mid lane champion. His level 1 and 2 shove is still super good for the meta. We're still more so in this Scuttle meta right now, and if you can help your jungler at Scuttle Crab and just securing the Scuttle Crabs in the early game with the priority that you can get, you're just gonna have a ton of success on Aurelion Sol, and you can completely snowball games out of control if you can get priority in the early game. And there's really not too much more to say about Aurelion Sol for this patch. He's still a great mid lane champion. If you put time into him, then I think he's the best mid laner that you can climb with for this patch. So staying in S tier here for another patch is going to be Fizz, despite the nerfs that he did receive. Now last patch, I think Fizz was honestly like an S plus mid lane champion, so even though he's getting nerfed in this patch, I don't think it's enough to drop him down into A tier. I still think he's a very strong assassin, and I'll explain why. The direct nerfs that Fizz got in this patch are still buffs compared to where he was at in 8.14, so the direct nerfs really didn't affect him too much. And then as for the changes to runes, I think the changes to runes are really not as bad as people would make them out to be, or some people are making them out to be. The changes there to Electrocute, it does hurt Fizz a little bit in the mid to late game, and it hurts assassins at that stage of the game, but in the laning phase, if you're able to proc Electrocute whenever it's off cooldown, which you can do a lot of the time with Fizz, then it is going to be a buff for the early laning phase and your ability to snowball in the laning phase. And then as for the changes to like Celerity and Scorch, you can just substitute those out for Absolute Focus and Gathering Storm, and they're really good substitutions. The nerfs there to Celerity and Scorch really don't affect these assassin picks very much. And then Fizz's matchups right now are also still really good for this patch. He does really well into the Zoe, who got nerfed in this patch, can do pretty well into the Syndra that's seeing more play after her buffs. Orianna is coming back into the meta now, and Fizz is a great pick against her. So I just think that overall, despite the nerfs Fizz got in this patch, he's still a great pick for this meta. So Talon, like Fizz, is staying S tier for this patch, even though he did get indirectly nerfed with the rune changes. Like I said for Fizz, the rune changes really didn't affect assassin picks as much as you would think. The Talon there, again, is going to swap over to Absolute Focus, as well as to Gathering Storm. You could also run Water Walking if you don't want to run Gathering Storm, and you're still going to do well with Talon in this patch, even though the runes did get nerfed. Talon, like Fizz, is also a great pick into a lot of the squishy AP mages that are being played right now, and he's also a really good pick into the Kassadin that's kind of been seeing a resurgence over these past few patches. Kassadin does have a pretty high pick rate right now. I've even seen a lot of players blind pick him over the past few patches, so I would definitely have Talon in your champion pool as a good counter to that Kassadin, and just overall as a solid assassin pick against a lot of these meta mid lane champions. And then lastly here, along with Anivia, I think that Ahri is just your most consistent mid laner that you can play for 8.16. She got buffed, I think it was 2 patches back now, or it might have been 1 patch. The buff she got to her E though was just really good. It propelled her up to being one of the strongest mid lane picks, if not the strongest for this patch right now. So I think that Ahri, she's just a very low risk, high reward champion. You're not really gonna lose lane hard on Ahri. She's a really good blind pick. There's not too many matchups that you're just going to get destroyed in. Your mid game is super good. You have the ability to make plays and find picks with your ultimate and with your charm, and you can just do so many different things with this champion to carry games, and because of that, I just think she's a very solid pick for solo queue. And the reason I do say that she's very low risk, high reward is that whenever you have your ultimate up with Ahri, you're never really in danger of dying. You can play really aggressive on the champion. You can look for picks with your charm by dashing in with your ultimate. And if they hit, then that could end up winning your team the game. And if it doesn't hit, you've got your other 2 ult charges to just back right out. So you can just look for so many different plays with Ahri, and they're not really going to be punished due to the fact that she just has an insane amount of mobility. Now, one thing to note here for the runes for Ahri in this patch, because Cheap Shot and Sudden Impact did get nerfed, Taste of Blood is actually doing best right now on Ahri in this patch. Cheap Shot's damage just really isn't worth taking anymore, at least in my opinion. And then Sudden Impact, it doesn't really even come into effect until you hit level 6, so I would now be taking Taste of Blood on Ahri for the laning phase. So for tier 2 in this patch here, I think that 2 champions that are pretty sleeper OP right now are both Zilean and Malzahar. Zilean is a pick that we've seen in pro play a little bit over these past few patches. He's also a very solid pick for solo queue because once you do hit that level 6, he can just shut down a ton of the meta picks being played right now. Great against a lot of the other mid lane assassins, also can do really well against the bruisers being played in the top lane and other assassins being played in the jungle. So I just think that overall, if you can play Zilean at a decent level, then he can be a very strong pick for solo queue. And then for Malzahar, he's another mid lane champion that can do a very good job at dealing with assassin picks. He's also one of the easiest mid laners to pick up in my opinion, and you're going to have a lot of success on this champion very early on just because his point and click crowd control with his ultimate is always going to be useful. I think Malz is a champion that even if you do fall behind a little bit in the early game, even if you're not doing so well in lane, you're always going to find your use in the mid game. You're always going to have some sort of use for your team because of your ultimate. So I just think that if you're auto-filled mid, or if you're just looking for another easy mid laner to pick up, then I'd be playing Malz in this patch. And then for Akali, it's still a little bit too early to tell exactly where she would fit in, like set in stone into the tier list, but I'm gonna have her in tier 2 for this patch. I do think the pick does have a lot of potential if you put the games on her. She's a pick that has already seen pro play. She's being played a lot right now in the higher elos. I do think that if you're picking her up for the first time though, and you haven't played a lot of games, you're probably not gonna have a lot of success, which is why her win rate is very low. If you were to base this tier list only off of win rates, then Akali would be probably tier 4 because she's sitting at like a 43-44% win rate right now, but I don't think that is an indication of how strong the pick is. I do think that as long as you put your games on Akali and know what you're doing, then she can be a very strong mid lane champion. And then for tier 3 in this patch, a few notables here. We've got Zoe moving down into tier 3 for this patch. Zoe did get hit with a nerf to her passive as well as to her W for this patch. And because both of those abilities, or both of those spells, they're point and click abilities, they're point and click damage, it does affect her a lot more for solo queue. If her Q or her E got nerfed, it wouldn't hurt her as much, but because it's guaranteed damage with your passive and your W, the nerfs actually did hit her pretty hard for this patch. And then for Syndra here, I do think that in certain matchups, and if you can play the champion well, she can be a pretty strong pick for this patch. The reason to why I have her in B tier though is just because she's not very blind pickable for solo queue. You've got Fizz right now, you've got Talon, Ahri, Echo, Zed, LeBlanc. There's just a lot of picks that can do pretty well against Syndra and can do well at shutting her down. So I do think that for a champion to be S tier and A tier, they do need to be pretty blind pickable. And I just don't think that Syndra is a very good blind pick for this patch. And then for the tier 4 or your C tier for this patch, you've pretty much got your regulars who are always down here in the C tier. Ryze, Galio, Victor, and Azir don't really get any better in this patch. If anything, they get worse, or Victor gets worse in this patch due to the Ahri nerfs, and just overall, these champions have been pretty bad for multiple patches in a row now, and if you're looking to climb, they're just not going to be the picks you want to spend the time on. So that is going to be all for the mid lane tier list for patch 8.16. If you guys did enjoy this video, then as always, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you've yet to already. So thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.